What's in a question? Maybe just about everything important. A smart and sharp question should strike up a more engaging conversation. So let's have ourselves a little discussion. Diane joins us in the studio to discuss whether game addiction should be considered a real disease or not. Good morning, Diane.
Good morning. Blue Monday.
The Monday blues. How do you tackle it? You wear blue.
How are you?
I'm good. I embrace the Mondays if you can't avoid it.
That's good.
And yourself?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah. Okay. I got sunburned over the weekend.
I was going to say, you had a pretty eventful weekend,
yes.
didn't you?
I went to the south seaside of Korea, and then it was a lot of sun.
I was going to say, it looked really sunny and beautiful in pictures, and usually what that means, it's really hot and cloudless.
Yes. And sunburns. Stretch marks.
Aloe to do the trick.
Right.
All right, let's extend our question of the day once more to all of our listeners.
All right, so question, is video game addiction a real illness? I mean, it's great to do things you enjoy, but can you go too far with a hobby? And at what point does it become an addiction? I mean, that's the question experts are trying to answer about playing video games. Even though gaming has been around almost 50 years, studies about its harms are still in the early stages. Different groups have come to different conclusions about whether problem playing should be called an addiction and designated as a real illness.
It's also, I remember, like violent movies and violent games. Like the tug of war has been going on for decades, as you said.
Does it influence people?
Right. Is it causation or just correlation? And the studies go back and forth. There's a short answer of it. Yet there are these health governing bodies that want to either clarify where perhaps addiction or signs of addiction start to show.
Exactly.
It's a problem because there are social issues arising from addiction these days, and there are some perhaps isolated but serious incidents.
Yes. In Ohio, a 17-year-old boy shot both his parents, killing his mother because they took away his Halo 3 video game. His defense was that he was punished to the brink by his addiction to video games, often playing for 18 hours straight.
Oh, dear.
I mean, this tragic story does not end in the States also. In South Korea, a couple was arrested for being so obsessed with video games that their infant daughter died of malnutrition. As Korean internet gaming cafes grew in popularity, so did stories of players who wore diapers just so they could avoid taking bathroom breaks. Using the results of a survey of more than 2,000 South Korean middle school students, close to 6% were classified as having a gaming disorder, and another 8% were considered to be at high risk for this disorder.
Okay, so just to be fair, out of a big spectrum, it's still a pretty minimized portion of the general public. Yet these are some serious red flags. Wearing diapers to avoid bathroom breaks, I feel like an intervention should have come long before that, right? All right, here's the thing. The gaming industry and the market is huge in Korea, and in fact, it's thriving. So how big is a game market anyway?
So the earliest video games dates back to 1940 when an electromechanical machine was introduced at the New York World's Fair. Public arcades remained the most popular places for gaming until the 1970s and 1980s when Atari's new video computer system brought games into homes.
Okay, I feel like those early version of those gaming consoles were a little bit easier for us to, I don't know,
stop?
Yeah, because you have to go home sometime of the day.
That's true.
Close. But I guess the problem starts to become a little bit more serious when you bring it to your own home. And technically, the only thing that's stopping you is sheer willpower.
Yourself, right. I mean, you have access every day, every hour.
All day.
So then video games found a new niche online with the rise of the internet, and it has evolved even further with mobile phones, which make it easy to play anywhere, anytime, like we said. Well, just a year ago, South Korea's video game market expanded more than 20% on year to rank 4th in the world last year on the back of stellar growth in online games. The country's video game market posted 18.9 trillion won, or about $16 billion in sales last year, up about 20% from the previous year. The U.S. has an even bigger gaming market. Sales of video game products in the U.S. have swelled over the years. In 2020, consumers spent $57 billion on video games, beating 2019 sales by 27%. And the trend continues, with Americans spending about $15 billion in the first quarter of 2021, a 30% increase over the first quarter of 2020.
And I'm sure the pandemic made the numbers hike around the world as we had less to do, and we're encouraged to stay home and indoors. What else can you do but play I got a game console during the pandemic to work out.
Oh my God.
To work out, which lasted like a day. And it was a colossal waste of money for me. But I mean, even the unlikely access to games during the heat of the pandemic.
I mean, the pandemic even made Lena buy a gaming console. I mean, that says about everything, right? Of course, with more people staying home, what else can they do, right? Globally, early 2020 projections were exceeded by $15.6 billion to $175 billion in revenue thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. Sales show no signs of stopping. Projections of 2023 sales are more than $217 billion.
And gaming companies are also smart. I mean, aren't they the ones leading the metaverse, leading sort of this more immersive experience with AR technology? And if it's that immersive, then we might be more inclined to try it, don't you think?
Exactly.
With all these tragic news around the world and the ever-growing gaming market recently, so the World Health Organization did designate game addiction as an illness.
Right. It happened in 2018. In response to those statistics, the WHO officially included internet gaming disorder in the International Classification of Diseases, noting that the disorder resulted in marked distress or significant impairment in personal, family, social, educational, or occupational functioning. So WHO further noted other associated health concerns, including insufficient physical activity, poor diet, problems with eyesight and hearing, musculoskeletal problems, sleep deprivation, aggressive behavior, and depression, as well as poor psychological functioning. So basically that sums about everything, right?
I was going to say, if you list all of that, it does sound a little bit more serious, right? And of course, we're talking about the worst case scenarios, but if you start to see red flags, maybe it's better to prevent it from happening than to allow it to run its course. The more we talk about this, like friends and colleagues can intervene a little bit earlier too, like, hey, maybe we should go get coffee.
Right, maybe we should go out and do something fun.
Go out for a walk on the Jeju Ole Trail.
Yes.
Now we've circled back to the beginning of the show. All right. However, the problem is not all experts and scholars agree with this particular move to designate a gaming addiction as an illness.
Right. So looking at gaming addiction as a disease, a 2020 American Psychological Association survey of 214 scholars revealed a lack of consensus on gaming addiction. Only 56.5% sided with the WHO decision. I mean, one might say that this is a majority.
Barely.
Right. But the remaining 43.5% is still very high who are against this idea, right? Similarly, 16.8% of scholars agreed that pathological video games use can be a mental health problem, but only 30.4% were skeptical.
See, the tug of war is very tense, and that's the thing. If we have an overwhelming majority, I think it'd be easier for us to classify something as a disease, because the severity of that is much more serious, right?
I mean, like simple diseases like cancer. Is cancer a disease? I mean, 100% people would say yes, but then for gaming addiction, there's a lot of skepticism around it.
There's room for discussion, which makes this conversation a little bit more tough. Korea has to decide whether to also join in on WHO's decisions and begin calling gaming addiction an illness.
Right. That's why I brought up this topic today. Korea also has to decide whether to register game addiction as a disease by 2015 when the
2025.
2025. Sorry,
2015 was it's 7 years ago.
Right. 2025 when the Korean standard classification of causes of disease is revised. In particular, in Korea, where a shutdown system was once implemented due to negative perception about games. It's a sensitive topic of debate, not only in the medical field, but also in the educational field.
That's a really good point. Right. Because there are a lot of games who promise to teach students something. Right. So are those all equal to, I don't know, Halo? It's probably not.
Probably not. So all eyes on the government's decisions as it affects many sectors of the economy as well as education, because when decided, it's going to go into effect starting right away from 2026.
Okay, so they should probably bring in all of the experts before making that decision. The implications seem a little bit more serious for those sectors. I'm pretty sure it's going to take a huge toll on the gaming industry, which is by far one of the biggest ones. Biggest sectors in Korea.
Right. A study showed that if game addiction was listed as a disease, more than 80,000 game industry jobs could be lost in 2 years. According to the study on the ripple effects of the introduction of game use disorder disease codes submitted by the Korea Creative Content Agency, the average sales of entire gaming industry would decrease by 44% over 2 years when the disease code is introduced in South Korea. So as a result, the total output of the game industry will decrease by about 12,360 billion won, or about $9.4 million, and more than 80,000 people will lose their jobs opportunities in the game industry.
Okay, so the implications of the ripple effects are really serious. So they have to weigh out what is the best way to cushion the blow.
Yeah.
In order to not necessarily villainize game makers, it's not just about that, is it?
Right.
It is about teaching maybe the younger generation, maybe the more vulnerable, to know a little bit more about themselves and the nature of games.
Yeah.
To make an entire industry a villain, that narrative is so oversimplified.
Right.
All right, so there you have it. It could be very consequential if we decide to label it an illness and a disease before, I suppose, doing the fair amount of research. The stigma was there before, too.
Right. Now it's going to stick more.
So there you go. I mean, there are jobs. People have become professional gamers. I mean, how are we going to deal with that? What are some arguments by the supporters and of this revision?
So people who support the WHO decision argue that it will bring several advantages to controlling the addiction. First, they say that the government will be able to collect national statistics that will give the severity of addiction at a glance. And second, it's undeniable that a lot of South Korean students as well as adults are suffering from game addiction, which they find a hard time controlling, right? With the related statistics, the government will be able to come up with solutions to combat addiction and help those people. And third, similar to the second reason, the government will be able to put a halt on those people who cannot stop themselves so that they can go back to their daily lives without playing games every day.
But how would they intervene? You know?
That's the hard problem.
The logistics are so tricky. Before we end today's question unboxing, how do we know if we're addicted to gaming? I feel like this is probably the healthier ones who can figure out for themselves.
Yeah, so according to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or so-called DSM, here's what to look for in yourself or someone close to you, your partner, a child, or a friend. I'm going to list several sentences, so if they cross off all the checkboxes, they might be inclined to be more addicted to gaming. One, thinking about gaming all or a lot of time, feeling bad when you can't play, needing to spend more and more time playing to feel good, not being able to quit or even play less, not wanting to do other things that you used to like, having problems at work, school, or homes because you're gaming, playing despite those problems, lying to people close to you about how much time you spend playing, using games to ease bad moods and feelings.
I think lying is a good way to gauge it. If you start to hide something in your life, you should probably ask yourself why.
Exactly.
Why do you feel inclined to lie to the closest people around you? Now, the people who can actually get to this checklist, you're probably the healthy ones. But I think intervention is necessary if you're a close friend, a family member who seem to witness this in people closest to you. It's a serious problem with no simple answer, yet we must continue discussions. Gaming is too much of a bad thing.
Probably.
Stay tuned for more. Thanks, Diane, for today's discussion.
I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. We have our sports stream segment coming up with Daniel next.